Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day. You've made it finally after weeks and weeks of online education. Um, yeah, we're here on the last day. We don't have a ton to do today. I'm going to wrap up the classism thing for you a little bit. And then I put together a few things just that maybe will help to tie the whole thing together a little bit. Um, Hopefully you're kind of already doing that a little bit, or hopefully you've done that a little bit in your papers, and I hope to see those very soon. But yeah, maybe it'll help just kind of stitch this whole thing together in a way that makes sense. At least I hope so, anyway. So that's kind of what we'll do today. Banamer's here. Good morning, Banamer. Thika's here. Hello. Monica's here. Good morning, Monica. Duong's here. Morning, Duong. Jenna's here. Hi, Jenna. Mashid is here. Good morning. Good morning, Mashid. KC is here. Good morning, KC. Karen's here. Hello, Karen. Manish is here. Good morning, Manish. Chan is here as well. Good morning, Chan. And Baha's here. Good morning to you, sir. Yeah. Okay. Let's dive in. Let's do this. So yesterday we were finishing up talking about classism, right? And we watched this TED Talk by Rutger Bregman, and he presented an argument to us, right? He was trying to convince us of something. He was trying to convince us that we're looking at poverty the wrong way. We're looking at poverty through our stereotypes and prejudices and preconceived ideas about who people in poverty are and why they're there in the first place. And Rutger Bregman is saying, well, these kind of ideas of individualism and meritocracy that sometimes lead us to believe that people in poverty are living in poverty because there's something wrong with them, or they're lazy or stupid or whatever. Rutger Bregman says no, that's actually not the case. Poverty isn't a personality defect, right? He says poverty isn't a lack of character, it's a lack of cash. It seems like a bit of a circular logic thing, right? It's people are in poverty because they have no money, and and that's why they're in poverty. And it's like, yes, on the surface there's a bit of circular logic there, but there's more to Rutger Bregman's argument, right? He's saying that in fact people behave differently when they don't have enough money, right? And when humans have scarce resources, when they don't have enough food or money or whatever they need to live, they start to behave differently. They start to make different choices. They start to act in different ways. And he says those are the things, in part, that help to exacerbate, to make poverty worse for these people. And so he says, good morning, Erica, or good evening, Erica. He says that, well, if people are making bad decisions because of the context, change the context, right? And so if people don't have enough money, then give them that money, right? And so he suggests a basic income guarantee, or a universal basic income. And so the idea here is to set a minimum amount of money that people need to feed themselves and clothe themselves and keep a roof over their head, and make sure that everyone in the country has that amount of money. And so if someone has a job and they work, then you don't need to provide them with any money. But if they don't make enough to clear the poverty line, if they don't make enough to feed themselves and clothe themselves and get a roof over their head, then the government will help them to do that. And even though that sounds like a bit of a surprising idea to many people, and many people have a very strong opposition to this, a pilot study done right here in Canada has suggested that actually it does work. The pilot study showed that educational outcomes improved, and hospitalizations and domestic violence and things like that actually decreased. And what I was trying to convince you of yesterday was that poverty is expensive, right? And so suggesting something like a universal basic income is expensive for sure. It's a, Rutger Bregman puts a $175 billion price tag on this program. That's a lot of money. But sometimes we forget the way that poverty costs us as a society, because those costs are hidden. They're not easy to see. And so, again, when we have less students finishing high school, when we have people winding up in the hospital more often, when we have domestic violence, when we have drug abuse, all of these things they add up, right? But we just can't clearly see how much they cost. But there's a huge cost to having a percentage of your population who cannot feed and clothe themselves, right? Hello, Jimmy, and hello, Ivan. And Rutger Bregman is saying, at least for the U.S. anyway, we can afford it, right? Look how much money the U.S. spends on its military. For just a quarter of that, they could end poverty in the United States, just like that. And so it's not so much a question of, is the money there? The question is, how does the country want to spend its money? Do they want to spend its money on more and more and more weapons and military? Or do they want to spend it on their people, making sure that their people have a basic standard of living? Right? And that's the choice that America has to make, and that's the choice that other countries will have to make as well. And the other thing I wanted to point out to you, and I think I said enough about this yesterday, but I'll just remind you of it, is that, this is probably a question that's going to come down the road, and many of you will see it answered one way or another. Because again, in many countries, jobs are becoming more automated, right? And so lots of the things that we used to do by hand are now being done by machines or by algorithms or computer programming. And so all those people that machines and robots and computers are going to put out of work, what jobs are they going to work? What's going to happen when we have 20% of our population that we just don't have jobs for anymore? There's no reason for them to work at anything. What are we going to do? Are we just going to let them live on the street everywhere? Or are we going to have to do something else? And so many people are suggesting that some form of universal basic income will be coming one way or another, because eventually there will be more people than there is jobs, and there'll just be no way to change that. Our machines and our computers will have made work so efficient that we just don't need everybody to work. We don't need everybody to do a job. And so again, some form of UBI might be coming eventually anyway. And then we watched a TED Talk by Richard Wilkinson, and Richard was talking about comparing economic inequality within societies and looking at social outcomes on that basis, right? So he talked a little bit about gross national income and gross domestic product, and I showed you these fancy maps just to sort of display the range of GNIs and GDPs around the world. And so we watched the video, and I asked you these questions, and I think what we got out of that, or what we should have got out of that, was that Wilkinson was saying that in rich market democracies, and so if a country is sort of a poor country or a country with a developing economy, this kind of thing doesn't apply, right? So poorer countries and countries with developing economies need to be able to provide their citizens with a certain level of income and infrastructure in order for them to basically to not be in poverty, right? To have their to be able to feed and clothe and shelter themselves, right? So what Richard Wilkinson says doesn't apply to economies with, or countries with developing economies. But he says in rich market democracies, how rich those countries are or how much money people make between countries doesn't seem to make much of a difference. But it does make a difference within societies. And so he says that when you look at the income inequality within society, how unequal people are on a financial basis, you see that, well, number one, countries vary quite a bit, right? We have on the far left here, we have countries like Japan and Finland and Norway and Sweden who are somewhat unequal in their society. And then we have countries on the far right, like the US and Singapore, who are very unequal, right? Some people have very, very little. Some people have quite a bit. And so based on sort of graphing and statistical analysis, Richard Wilkinson tries to convince us that the more inequality we have in our society, the more social problems we can expect, right? We can expect lower life expectancies, lower math and literacy scores, higher infant mortality, higher homicides, imprisonment. All of these kind of social programs, all of these social problems will increase in frequency, and they'll do it not because people don't have enough money overall, but because there is a greater and greater gap between the richest of people and the poorest of people. And again, look at the US. The US is way off on its own on the top right there in terms of income inequality. And according to Richard Wilkinson, not surprisingly, it is the worst in terms of social problems. And I think to some degree we've seen that during the past 2 or 3 months. The entire world has been experiencing a bit of a crisis because of COVID-19, and really I think the US is handling this crisis the worst of all. And there's many reasons for that, but I would suggest that one of the reasons why things are so bad is because there are so many pre-existing social problems already, right? And this COVID situation just makes everything far, far worse. So Richard Wilkinson says that, the greater inequality you have in your society, the more social problems you will have. And he shows us this graph, and he tries to prove to us that, in fact, even if you are in an unequal society, and even if you're at the top of that unequal society, you're still better off in a more equal society where you would have less, right? So this is infant mortality. So this is children that die before the age of 2 years old, I believe, for various causes. And of course, in the past, before we had medicine and sterilization and all that stuff, infant mortalities were quite high in many societies. Globally, they're much lower than they've ever been. Of course, it depends on the country you live in. But infant mortality is still a measure of overall physical health. And if you look, if we have a comparison here for England and Wales in red and Sweden in blue. And if you look at the father's occupational class, these are the people at the top of society, right? So the 2 bars on the far right, these are the people at the top of society. So doctors, lawyers, heads of companies, CEOs. These are sort of the wealthiest and most powerful members of society in both of these countries. And even though, if you look at the red, infant mortality is definitely lower in the upper class than it is in any other economic class, Sweden still does better, right? So there seems to be, like he says, there seems to be even a small benefit to living in an equal society rather than an unequal one. Even if you are at the top of your unequal society, there's still a benefit to living in a society that's more equal. Um, yeah, and so he says, in summary, he says, bigger income gaps lead to deteriorations in all of these things, right? Deteriorations in people's health, in people's social relationships, and in human capital, right? And human capital is important even if you don't care about people, even if you just care about your country. You need your people to be healthy and educated and working hard in order for your country to prosper. And if that's not happening, your country is going to suffer, right? And so all of this human capital is kind of a loss of human potential. And again, even if you don't care much about people, it's a negative for your country. So he's saying that where this whole thing comes from, where these social problems come from, has to do with social evaluative threat. And so he feels that the greater inequality you have between people in society, the less valued people feel, especially on the bottom end of the scale. And psychological studies have demonstrated that social evaluative threat is very stressful for human beings. And again, this is why people don't like public speaking. This is why people don't like getting up in front of a crowd and speaking to them, because there is a high perception of people evaluating your performance when you're up on stage in front of them. And so many people find that very, very stressful. And so here Richard Wilkinson says the same thing, that people are feel that they're being judged, they're being evaluated because they are so much poorer than the richer of society, and that results in mental health issues and social problems. And so he says, but we can fix this. He says we can fix it through salaries that are more aligned with greater markets. And so toning down CEO pay and bonuses and things like that for rich bankers. But he says countries can also intervene through taxation. And so even if you live in a country with really big income differences, you can tax, right? You can tax people with lower incomes less and people with higher incomes more. To some degree, that's the way it works in Canada. Although I think overall we're more equal anyway. But we could be more aggressive with our taxation, and we could make things more equal if we wanted to. Excuse me. Right. So, quick summary for classism. Classism is the systematic oppression of poor and working class people by people with wealth, right? People who are wealthy and powerful are in the dominant group, and they have greater access to jobs, to investments, to money, to housing, to food, to medicine, all of these things. And classism, again, is held in place by a lot of beliefs about the value of hard work, about individualism, about meritocracies. All of those ideas hold classism in place and allow it to continue. And so again, even though, what did I say here? Okay, this is just a summary of some of the things that we've said. So even though global poverty has actually decreased, income inequality around the world has continued to grow. Some people and some companies are becoming much, much richer than they ever have before. As a result, they're able to pay their top people more than anyone's ever been able to pay before, and they're able to push for financial incentives and tax breaks from government. As an example, I don't know if you were following a year or two ago, but Amazon was looking for a new place to put a North American warehouse, and cities were falling all over themselves trying to beg Amazon to come to their city. And so again, you have a big, powerful company, and governments are willing to do whatever they want in order to please these companies. Again, there are some social messages around this here, right? Like, anyone who wants a job can get one. Well, sometimes that's possible, but again, can you find a job that pays you enough to stay above the poverty line? Here's some quick stats for you. 60% of the workers in the US are paid by the hour. So they don't have a salary, they work by the hour. And 2.6 million of these people make less than minimum wage. And they also have no health care or other benefits. And so these people are just barely scraping by. If anything happens to them, if they get sick, if they hurt themselves, if they get into a car accident, they have no safety net. They have no ability to continue to pay for food and shelter and things like that. Often in the US, this is less so in Canada, but in the US, we often assume the middle class is the majority, but it's not. It's the working class and the working poor. So most people in the US are not in the middle, they're at the bottom. Okay, so it's not the middle class isn't the biggest piece, the lower class is. And we should probably point out too that efforts to raise minimum wage in the US are constantly defeated in Congress. And it might not be a bad idea to look at who Congress is. So in the House of Representatives in the United States, 81% of them are male and 94% of them are white. And they earn about $175,000 a year with benefits. And 51% of them are already millionaires. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? That people who are so well off already are denying raising the minimum wage for the people who make the very least. Again, you'll see in Canada the situation is better. The minimum wage varies depending on what province you're in, but only here in Canada we have 6% of workers earning minimum wage, but 60% of those are women, right? And again, people working minimum wage often work very hard. This is where the meritocracy thing falls apart. You know, if you want to be successful, just work harder. Minimum wage jobs are very tiring, and you will work hard, but you won't necessarily get ahead. You won't necessarily be able to sort of rise up the economic ladder. And again, families that don't have any inherited wealth sometimes will find it difficult to climb that ladder. They'll find it difficult to get a mortgage. They'll find it difficult to invest. They'll find it difficult to send their children to post-secondary education. And so, again, sometimes it's easy to dismiss this and say, oh, it's just the value of hard work. But really what it is if you are in a higher socioeconomic level, you have more privilege. You have the ability to do more things. And people at the bottom often cannot access better education, better housing, financing or loans that they might need to build wealth. They just won't be able to access those things. And so Richard Wilkinson kind of sums this up nicely by saying that this inequality within society it creates dysfunction, right? And that dysfunction affects everybody. It doesn't just affect the poorest of us, it affects all of us. So, before I go on, any questions on classism before we put it away and leave it forever and ever and ever? Okay, so Casey's good. Yeah, I know. I know you're good. Karen's good. I know you're good, Karen. She's good. How could be avoided? I'll talk about that in 2 minutes. Maybe I can answer your question. Maybe. Good question, though. Oh, okay. So here we go. I'm going to finish this whole thing, but before I do, I just want to mention maybe two things. First thing, obviously, there's no final exam in this class, so when you turn in your final paper to me, which is due today, of course, then you are done. You are off the hook. I will mark them as quickly as I can, because after I mark them, I get to go on vacation, so I'll try to finish them as quickly as I can. I believe that grades for secondary are due on August 17th, and so at the very latest, you'll see your grades on the 17th, but for me, you'll probably see them earlier than that, because I don't want to take that long. Yeah, so after that, I'll post everything in Student Portal. Like I said, I have a backup Excel sheet with all your grades in it, and so I will compare what Student Portal has done and what my spreadsheet says. Things went a little weird this term. Things didn't go exactly as I planned, and so Student Portal may or may not be accurate, and so I think I will lean more on my Excel sheet to give me the right grade. But that said, yeah, but usually, but I have a way to check back and forth. I have two, so I keep track of your grades in two places, and so I can compare and make sure. And so before I submit final grades, I will check everything to make sure that I've seen everything and marked everything, and everything is in there and everything is correct and legitimate, okay? Second thing that I will mention to you is before you get to see your final grade, and some of you may know this already, a little class evaluation will pop up, and so that's your opportunity to evaluate me and to evaluate this class. And so the question will ask you, or the evaluation or the feedback form, whatever they call it, will kind of ask you questions about me and about the course, and you can type in comments if you want to say something specifically. Those comments and your answers are completely anonymous, so there's no way that I can see them or see. Not I will get to see them, but I won't be able to tell who wrote what. So you can say anything you want in those evaluations, and I'll never be able to tell it was you. That said, be nice, because I have feelings. But if you do want to say something, by all means say it. I'm tough. I'm tough enough to take it. So you'll fill that in. Again, it's totally anonymous, and I can't tell who wrote what. And then you'll get to see your final grade, okay? And the last thing I'll say before I do this summary thing is I did want to thank you all for being here. I do really like my job. I like it a lot better when it's in person. I don't like it quite so much when we're doing this online thing. But I do really like my job, and I'm glad that all of you are here. And I'm glad that you sort of toughed it out till the end, because I think, I've talked to a few students about this, and I think most of us prefer to be in a real classroom. Most of us prefer to be in a real classroom. Some of us, I think, are enjoying this online thing, but Online people, I think you're in the minority. I think most people prefer to be in a real classroom, and so do I. So it's kind of unfortunate that we've had to do this class this way, but but I think it's good that we did it. I think it's good that we did it anyway. Um, yeah. So I think that's what I wanted to say. I just want to say thank you for taking this course. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it and I enjoyed it very much. Um, I hope you enjoyed it as much as you can enjoy a class that you have to take, um, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes you just have to take something. But I hope you enjoyed it to the most degree possible. Um, yeah, and thank you. You're all lovely. Okay, let's finish it off, all right? So, this is kind of where we landed at the end of today and at the end of yesterday, right? Richard Wilkinson was trying to convince us that economic inequality within a society actually hurts a society, right? It creates all kinds of social problems, and it creates social problems regardless of where on the social scale you are. There is a disadvantage to living in an unequal country, even if you're the one on the top of the pyramid, right? Even if you're the one at the top of the hierarchy, you're still better off living in a society that's more equal. Um, so, Richard Wilkinson said that social problems are exacerbated by situations of greater inequality. Yes, you're always going to have mental illness, you're always going to have some people in prison, you're always going to have some people dropping out of high school. That's always going to happen, but the more inequality you have in society, the greater those problems seem to be. But keep in mind that Richard Wilkinson was only talking about economic inequality, right? He was only talking about money. He wasn't talking about anything else. And so think about all of the different types of inequality or oppression that we've talked about in this class, right? We've talked about sexism, we've talked about racism, we talked about ableism. We may have bumped into heterosexism a little bit. We didn't have a whole unit on it, but I thought I'd put it in there. And we talked about religious oppression as well. So these are all other forms of inequality that actually don't have anything to do with money. And so really Richard Wilkinson was just looking at one measure of inequality, not any others. And so consider maybe the scale of the problem when you add in that people are unequal in societies, not just according to how much money they have, but in terms of how much power and opportunity and respect and safety and autonomy that people can have, and how big an effect that likely is. So we said we have a lot of inequality in society, or at least I'm trying to convince you of that. And how can we see that? Well, I said the best way to see that was to look at broad-based society-wide statistics. Okay, so we can't see social inequality very easily by looking at single incidents, right? We can't look at it by simply seeing someone make a racist comment, or seeing a movie with sexism in it. That doesn't necessarily demonstrate that we have broad-based social inequality. What shows it is statistics, right? Reliable, well compiled society-wide statistics. Okay. So when we look at differences in life expectancies and educational outcomes, income potential, measures of poverty, the potential for people to be in prison, instances of mental illness, when we can see those types of numbers across society, and when we can see them sorted out according to social groups, then we can really see what's happening, right? We can really see which social groups are falling behind, which ones have a disadvantage, right? That's really how we see social inequality. It's really difficult to see, just by walking around and listening and looking at people, right? Those are all kind of personal anecdotal patterns, which sometimes can be very important, but looking at society as a whole is the way that you can see these things. Well, and why do we see inequality in the first place? Well, we said that all societies are composed of social institutions, right? And these institutions are kind of patterns or structures in society that meet society's needs and reproduce society as it already is. And so we mentioned that social institutions are things like governments, families, the economy, the education system, the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, religion, the mass media. All of these are social institutions that work to fulfill society's needs, but they also reproduce society as it already is. And it's important to remember that social institutions are controlled by the dominant group, right? And so the dominant group can usually benefit from this because they can structure society in a way that benefits them, and they can impose their ideas and prejudices on the rest of society. Okay? So why are dominant groups in control of these social institutions in the first place? Well, usually this has to do with historical precedent, right? Historical processes. And so in some cases, it might have to do with the development of agriculture, like we talked about with sexism. In some places and in some situations, it has to do with colonialism. It certainly does here in North America. Could be the result of civil wars. It could be the result of a government coup. It could partly have to do with institutionalized religion. And it could have to do with other forms of oppression that are operating in the society as well. But all of these can kind of work together or separately in such a way that puts particular social groups in power, whether they be men, whether they be white people, whether they be Christians, whether they be wealthy people. All of these processes can work to ensure that some groups are in a position of power and they control society's institutions. How do dominant groups benefit from their control of social institution? Well, mostly through privilege, right? And we talked about privilege. We said that dominant groups benefit by being able to access certain opportunities that minoritized groups do not have, or that are denied to them, or they have to struggle, that they have to struggle more for. Dominant groups also benefit by being seen as normal, right? And so in this way, they're able to avoid being seen through the lens of any kind of stereotype or prejudice. And we saw that with the resume experiment back in one of our earlier chapters, right? The white sounding names, there was the resumes with the white sounding names and the black sounding names. The white sounding names didn't trigger any stereotypes or prejudices, and so those people were able to simply be evaluated as people, as individuals. But the black sounding names, they were interpreted through stereotype, right? Through prejudice, through the lens of blackness. And so again, dominant groups can benefit by maintaining access to resources and opportunities that not everyone has, but they also benefit just by being seen as individuals and being seen as the sort of default normal situation. So if dominant groups are imposing prejudice on society, where do those prejudices come from? And we talked about this as well, right? We said that prejudices come from stereotypes that are exaggerated and given positive or negative value. And again, many of these prejudices and stereotypes have historical precedent as well. There are stereotypes about and prejudice against Jewish people, for instance, and those prejudices go back hundreds of years. More recently, I think in the Western world, is the phenomenon of Islamophobia, right? And so there are historical events that connect to Islamophobia, but also the use of Muslims as kind of stereotypical bad guys and terrorists in movies. That has generated, partially generated Islamophobia as well. We have misogyny that goes back thousands of years, arguably. Homophobia, which depending on the culture you live in, may go back hundreds of years or maybe thousands, depending. So these prejudices and stereotypes are often very old, and they're often very stable, right? They get passed down from generation to generation. And they do that because of this process of socialization, which we talked about closer to the beginning, right? If you remember, we said that humans are kind of like little computers. We're born with some of the hardware, but we don't really have any software. We don't have any software installed, and our culture is the software that we need to survive in a society, but it needs to be downloaded, right? And there's a long process for humans of downloading their culture, and that process, we said, was called socialization. So everything we know comes to us through the process of socialization, and social institutions have a major role in socializing us, right? So of course our families are our first agents of socialization. They teach us how to be human and what behavior is acceptable and what behavior is not acceptable. And over time we continue to be socialized by family, but then we go to school and we're socialized by the education system. We might go to a church or a temple and our religion will socialize us. We might turn on the TV or go on the internet and mass media will start to socialize us. And so in the process of us humans interacting with all of these social institutions, we pick up and absorb many stereotypes and prejudices. And again, many of them are taught implicitly, not explicitly. And so people don't tell us directly what the prejudices are. We kind of just absorb them almost by accident without knowing. And so like a computer virus, they kind of operate in the background, and they influence our behavior in ways that sometimes we're not entirely conscious of. And so this is your question right here, Baha. So what can we do, right? What can we do about this? Well, if we go back a little further in this course, you'll remember that we talked about the idea that knowledge is socially constructed, okay? And so, yes, facts exist, right? There are some things that are absolutely true, regardless, but huge portions of our reality, of the things that humans think are real, are actually only real because we agree that they are, right? Humans live in a socially constructed reality where many things have meaning, and they have meaning because we all agree that they have that meaning, right? $20 is worth $20 because we all agree that it is, right? The piece of plastic or paper that makes up that $20 is not really worth anything, right? It's basically garbage. But because we all agree that that $20 bill is worth $20, then it's worth $20, right? And that's just one tiny example of the way that humans impose meaning on the world. And if everyone shares that meaning, those meanings carry very significant, have very significant power and have very significant consequences for people in society. Which is a little weird, but I think it's also encouraging, because since knowledge is socially constructed, it can be, and as I've noted here, it constantly is anyway, but it can be reconstructed, right? We can relearn new things. We can rebuild new ideas. And how? How do we do that? Well, if you go back even further in this class, you'll find that this is what we wanted to do, right? We wanted to, number one, we wanted to strive for intellectual humility, right? So we wanted to understand that none of us know everything, right? All of us hold certain values and beliefs and knowledge in our heads. Some of those things may be correct. Some of those things may be very incorrect. Some of those things may be true from certain perspectives, but not from others. And so we have to be open to the fact that we could be wrong about things that we think we know. We have to recognize the difference between informed knowledge and opinion. This is the critical thinking piece, right? Lots of people have feelings about things. Lots of people have opinions that they state, and that's fine. Opinions and feelings are just fine, but they're not the same as informed knowledge, right? They're not the same as scientific study. They're not the same as carefully collected data, and they're not the same as a well thought out, valid argument, right? And so you can feel as you want and you can have opinions as you want, but they are not the same as solid arguments backed up by actual data, right? So there's a difference between those two things. We said that we wanted to let go of personal anecdotal evidence and look at broad social patterns. So we have all constructed a picture of how we think the world and society works based on our viewpoint. But remember that idea of positionality, right? The social groups that you belong to in society, those are going to influence where you stand, and that's going to influence what you see. And so how you see society might not be the same as the way someone in a different set of social groups sees society, because their positionality is different. And so we have to look at broader social patterns. We have to try to look at society in a way that exposes any of the inequalities that are operating, regardless of what our perspectives may or may not tell us. We said that we wanted to notice our own defensive reactions. And so sometimes when you hear things that are upsetting or that challenge you, it's because those ideas are kind of bumping up against your socialization. They're bumping up against the deeply held ideas that you have. And that's okay. That's just a good opportunity to reflect on why you believe the things that you believe, and should you keep believing them? And maybe the answer is yes. When you see George Floyd murdered by police officers, you should have a strong reaction to that, right? Because it bumps up against our socialization, right? We see it as very, very wrong. But sometimes we have a reaction to things that maybe we need to indicate that we might need to re-examine our beliefs a little bit. And again, we just have to be open to doing that. Yeah, and finally, we have to recognize our own social positionality. So our place in society informs how we perceive it to be. And so any of us walking down the street will have a slightly different experience than everyone else. And we have to be open to that. So if we can do these things, then with some work and perseverance, I think we can head in the direction of having actual social justice. And remember, this is what we said social justice was. It was maintaining the idea that all people in society deserve and should have access to the same rights and the same resources, right? Some things shouldn't be denied to people simply because they belong to a certain social group. We also want to try to embrace human rights and the idea that all citizens are equally worthy, and all citizens have a right to have their basic needs met within society. And so if we want to pursue social justice, we have to find a way to spread opportunities as widely as possible, right? To give everyone the opportunity to access the things that they need and to hopefully do the things that they want to do. And finally, we want to try to reduce and, if possible, eliminate unjustified inequalities. So places where some people have more than others and there's no reason why they should, we want to try and eliminate those things, right? And I think this is the bottom line here. The bottom line is that, and I hope you've seen this already, and I think you probably have, but all of these different types of oppression that we've looked at, sexism, racism, ableism, religious oppression, they all work the same, right? They all operate the same way. It doesn't really matter who the dominant group or the minoritized group is. It doesn't matter if it's men and other genders, or if it's Christians and other religions, or if it's white people and peoples of color. It doesn't matter what the particular stereotypes or prejudices say about certain types of people. All of these oppressions work the same way, right? They all use stereotype and prejudice and social power to advantage one group of people over another group of people. And so if you are against racism, for instance, I think it would be very difficult to say that you are not against homophobia or heterosexism, because again, those things are exactly the same. They operate exactly the same way. It's just that the social groups and the stereotypes are different. So I think that's kind of the bottom line here. And I think it's important for us to remember all those things because, like Richard Wilkinson explains to us, that inequality hurts everyone in society. Everyone. It doesn't matter which social group you belong to, if you're in the dominant group, if you're in the minoritized group. It doesn't matter if you're talking about sexuality or gender or race or religious affiliation or class or citizenship status. It doesn't matter. Inequality hurts all of us. And so that's why I think we need to fix it. Okay. I think that's what I had to say. So questions, things you want to ask, things you want to say, statements, jokes, complaints, anything you want to say at this point. If you're still awake, I see there's 15 people here, so that's good. Are 15 people awake and paying attention? Anything else you want to say? Or ask? You just wanted to say Cheetos? You've done it. Everything clear so far? I had a question about the grades, but I think I'll ask after class. Okay, yeah, send me a message, Manish, and I'll answer you after class. What else? So far, Cheetos. Casey is good. Karen, are you eating Cheetos right now? Because it's way too early in the morning to eat that stuff. Come on. Rashid is good. Dika's okay. Good. Sam is good. Good. All right. Finally rained for 2 days after all the heat. Yeah, I know. I was roasting in here. I was so thankful for the rain. Eric is good. Woo! Duong is good. Okay. I understand. Okay. It's true. Some people do make things worse, right? And sometimes it's sometimes because they're sort of miseducated or they don't understand. Sometimes they just do the wrong thing, which is possible, right? We all have to, you know, fixing social inequality is a difficult process, and so we all have to be somewhat patient with people and understand that sometimes when you think you're doing the right thing, you might do the wrong thing. Sometimes when people think they're saying the right thing, maybe it's not. And so we have to we have to be we have to be somewhat patient with people as well. And I'm not saying that we need to be patient with Cheetos here, but I am saying that it's a difficult process, and sometimes people make things worse, and there's no defense for that, and sometimes people make things worse by accident. So we have to be able to distinguish that as well. But I'm not saying Cheetos is one of those people or one of those groups. Okay, so I think that is where it ends, my friends. I think that's all I have for you. I don't think I have any more. I don't think I have any more social justice for you here. Let me just check. No, no, there's no more social justice here. I'm all out. I'm fresh out of social justice. Um, oh, Trump is the Cheeto. Yeah, he is orange. Are you calling him a Cheeto? Are other people calling him a Cheeto? He's definitely orange. He's definitely orange. Um, Cheetos would probably disagree. They'd probably say don't associate us with that guy. We don't want people boycotting our product. Okay, people. So on that note, we'll leave it there on the note of Cheetos. Um, Cheetos are Jimmy. They're kind of like a cheese snack. They're kind of like everyone does. Okay, I'll take your word for it. I didn't think they called them a Cheeto. Yeah, they're a cheesy snack, Jimmy. They're kind of you get them in a bag, kind of like they're not potato chips, but they're kind of crispy snacks. I don't even know what they're made of. I think they're made out of styrofoam. They're a very bright orange color, which is a little frightening. I don't really like them very much, but lots of people do. Okay, that's all I have for you people. I have no more social justice. I'm all out. Um, so don't forget to submit your final papers to me later today. Again, I'll mark them as quickly as I can. I'll get the marks posted as quickly as I can. Um, again, thank you very much for being here. You've all been lovely. Yeah, and maybe since I think we're going to be doing class in person in September, maybe I'll see some of you around if we're lucky. Okay, so have a nice rest of the afternoon and rest of the summer if I don't talk to you, and maybe we'll see you in September. Okay, so that's it. I'm out. Bye.